Hello, builders of good. Thank you for joining us and tuning in to the Build Good Fundraising podcast and to the first ever live Build Good Fundraising podcast. Thanks for being here. Fundraising isn't easy, but it should be simple. So on this show, we take the mystery out of raising money for your nonprofit. Now, today, super excited. We've got Megan Toscano joining us from Charity Water. Megan is the director of performance marketing at Charity Water, and she'll get into what that title means. We'll get into that. But we're going to focus our chat on how Charity Water is thinking about growth, how Charity Water is thinking about their digital strategies. But we'll also get into direct mail and direct response TV ads. We'll get into some of the other things Charity Water has been testing because they're always testing. We're also going to talk about some of the bets the organization is making, and we'll wrap it up with a bit of an outlook for fundraising in 2023 with the economic conditions being what they are. What is Charity Water thinking about that? What are they seeing? So let's get right into it. Megan, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited. I also feel a little bit like a test subject going live, but we'll see how it goes.
We'll see how it goes. We've already had a few hiccups, but we'll get this thing sorted out. Okay, you're the director of performance marketing. Performance marketing is a term that we often hear in the for-profit sector, not so much in the nonprofit sector. Just give us a bit of a primer what performance marketing means and what you're in charge of.
Yeah. So to be fair, I think in a lot of different positions, you might have performance marketing be different things. So I don't think there's like a catch-all definition for it. But here at Charity Water, it means that I'm really responsible for acquisition in entirety. So whether that's through offline means, online means, it's really focused on the media spend we have, how we're allocating that media spend out per initiative, and if we're seeing a return on that spend over time. So all acquisition all the time for me.
All right. So if you do your job really well, then the other folks on your team have like a flow of donors coming in, and then they're going to work on retention and upgrading and sort of lifetime value, right?
Yeah, though I will say, it's not just me out on an island by myself. There's a really wonderful team alongside me working to create, ads, brainstorm campaigns, audiences, et cetera, to make the acquisition campaigns work as hard as they do for us.
Right. Now, when most of us think about Charity Water, we think an organization that is just absolutely killing it with digital, innovator in the digital space. And I know that you've been testing a lot of, you've been varying your media mix a little bit. You're thinking of different mediums and channels and different strategies and tactics as you grow to maintain that growth. And I do want to get into that. But first, I want to spend the first sort of half of our conversation talking about your digital game, because I think there's so much that we can learn from there. So walk us through a little bit your media spend, your donor acquisition efforts digitally. What does that look like at the moment for Charity Water?
Yeah, so coming into Charity Water, and I've been here for about a year now, coming into Charity Water, historically, what they've focused on is digital advertising, basically the crux of it being just a direct response program, which means we're spending out money to immediately acquire donors and immediately achieve a return on investment, whether that's absolute immediacy or an assumed ROI because there's a lifetime value to some of these donors. The focus has always been we spend this amount to get 2 times this amount.
Right.
So digitally, where we focus a lot of our efforts are paid search and paid social. I would say from a prospecting lens, a majority has been paid social, specifically Meta and YouTube. YouTube really consistently being our most successful channel overall. And yeah, but I would say we spend about 75% of our budget historically on those paid social platforms like Meta and YouTube. And that's where we're acquiring most of our donors currently. And then of course we run on Google from a paid perspective and a grant perspective, and on Bing from a grant perspective as well, to just ensure if people are searching for our branded terms or some of the non-branded donation terms that make sense for Charity Water, we're making sure we're putting ourselves in front of them as well.
Right. Now, I think digital advertising often mystifies a lot of nonprofits because first you gotta run a certain amount of spend to even like get smart enough, but what's working and what isn't, find the right audience for your targeting, all of that. Some nonprofits are a little bit risk averse to do that. Some just aren't literate enough or don't really know what they should be doing, so they end up running, display ads that are maybe more brand building, less direct response. Or if they do try direct response, maybe they're not spending a ton of time optimizing that landing page or thinking through that journey. And so it's kind of like, well, we tried it and it didn't really work.
Yeah.
I want to quickly get into how you're thinking about direct response, which is somebody gets served an ad on Facebook, on Meta, on YouTube. Does that go to the spring, which is your monthly program, or how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, so for us, we focus a majority of our efforts specifically on the spring, and that's because there's that lifetime value factor. And especially with a lot of the paid social platforms, the cost to acquire year over year is more and more competitive for a whole host of reasons, tracking, reporting, sophistication, and audience targeting. But generally what we're really thinking about on those platforms is, like you said, how do we optimize the campaigns? How do we tell the right story? And so we do a lot of testing on the ad space to understand how to message the spring to people and how to get them to understand our monthly giving program. And then, as you mentioned, there is a landing page component of that is very specific and centered on the spring as well. And so we really want to make sure within our direct response ads that there's cohesion between the ad and the landing page. And so the landing page you're driven to in the ad isn't on our main site. It's not even within the navigation of the site. It's really meant for this subset of people to go to so that it matches with their first touch point ad experience.
Right. So are they in a bit of a funnel, as in they can't really navigate around the what they're seeing is, I mean, the one that I landed on was Scott's 20-ish minute video.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
A tiny bit. So what I will note is some of the ads have specific landing pages, right? So if you saw a Scott landing page, you probably went through like the spring film or a more narrative perspective of Scott's story and the origin of Charity Water. And so we have all kind of different landing pages
right.
that mimic kind of the ad experience. In most cases, yes, you can't navigate anywhere else. So there still will be that Charity Water logo in the left-hand side, the top left-hand side, where if you click on that, it'll take you to homepage, but it won't have the right-hand side hamburger icon if you're on mobile, or the main navigation if you're on desktop. And that was something that we tested, really trying to understand, like, is it hurting our conversion rate to allow people to explore other areas of the site? And it was hurting us. And I think it can be overwhelming to a person who maybe this is their first time getting to know Charity Water and what we do, and they go to a site where there's 8 different pages that they can cycle through, and eventually they might just branch off and exit. And so we really want to make sure that the landing page has the information they need and that they can convert through that landing page and feel really excited and happy about making an impact without potentially trying to explore for an hour and not really knowing where to go or what they want to learn.
Right. So there's two very specific things I kind of want to zero in on. One is the fact that the first ask for a lot of time is the monthly ask, where generally speaking, a lot of nonprofits would say, well, that feels like it's way too big of an ask. Let's get a first time gift and then let's upgrade to monthly later. So that's the first thing that I'm interested in whether you've tested. Have you done that, like one time gift versus the spring? I'm assuming you have, if most of it is going to the spring.
Yeah, so that is a little bit before my time. I know it was tested pretty immensely. And what we found from an ROI perspective is, even though we're spending a little bit more money to get the spring member instead of a one-time donor, we're generating way more lifetime value with that monthly donor. So it's worth that cost. If it's $60 more to get a spring subscriber, it's 100% worth that $60 more.
Right.
And so that was kind of the testing that was done. Do I think from a long-term perspective that we're only going to run monthly subscriber ads for eternity? No, I think we're already kind of discussing that now as we look to kind of broaden and scale as an organization, because with our direct response program currently, and with any brand's direct response program, you're bidding for one objective. And if you have small to moderate budgets, you can maintain an ROI for a very long time, as long as you're optimizing your audiences and creatives and whatnot. But if you're going from, trying to be a $100 million organization to a $500 million organization, you have to scale, and you have to kind of broaden your audience and broaden the types of audiences you're bringing in. So for us, we've been, I'm really grateful that people see our ads and they want to become monthly subscribers right away. And that's been a sustainable program for us thus far, but I don't think it's going to be sustainable for us long term. And I don't think it would be sustainable for any organization long term from a growth perspective.
Got it. So that was my first question. Going to a monthly offer as a first time offer versus like a one-time gift. The second question I had is, backing up even further, a lot of organizations don't even drive their ad spend to a first-time gift because they're finding that that conversion is like a heavy lift. So they'll drive paid ads to a free resource, something where the donor exchanges their email address for something like a resource, a video, a movie, something like that. And then right on the back end, there's a donation page, which is like, hey, the resource is on its way to you. And then there's a bit of a pivot to an ask to cover the ad spend. I'm assuming you've tested that as well for you to take this approach.
We have. We actually tested a couple things the year prior to my coming here. And then we tested another kind of ebook lead generation format the year I started, which was the end of 2021 into early 2022. And it performs well for us. But the funny thing about it is even that flow doesn't perform as well as just immediately giving them the story and the ask. And I do think it has to do with how impactful a lot of our narrative stories are. Emotionally impactful, that you just can't get from, let's say, an ad trying to give you an ebook about how your kid can help change the world. I think there is something about the creative built for different campaigns that makes people feel differently about whether they're willing to give. I would also just say, because I know we're talking a little bit more holistically about nonprofits, is Charity Water has been around for 16 years, and I think there is some brand awareness about Charity Water. Enough brand awareness is another conversation. That's why we're broadening. But within kind of the audiences that we run, there's enough maybe initial awareness that allows us to sort of skip some of those steps. Whereas, if we were a younger charity, if we were 1 year old and I had come in to manage the direct response program, there's no way we would be able to do that.
Right. Well, let's talk about brand building a little bit. So in your ad spend, a decent amount is direct response, which is here's an ad, here's a landing page, will you make a monthly gift? How much of your ad spend is just focused on sort of brand awareness or brand building before somebody is served the direct response ad?
Maybe 5 to 10%, not even. I mean, we go right to the point for the most part. And we're able to with the spend that we have right now. But, I think something to keep in mind, just to give some context, is, Charity Water at this point, we've helped 15 million people get water, but there's still 770 million people in the world who lack access to clean water. And so for us, our mission and kind of our focus for the next couple of years ahead is that we want to go farther. We want to push harder. We want to focus on getting to the day where we can ultimately say that no one on earth is drinking dirty water. And we're not there yet. That's the problem. And so what we want to do is we want to grow quicker. We want to expand our tool set and teams. We want to optimize current platforms. We want to test new platforms. We want to explore new techniques. And that's kind of where the brand building starts to come in, right? Because we can't rest on those laurels we've had. We can't keep spending what we spent into direct response and we use a narrow audience pool that we know works all the time, but eventually that audience pool has been leveraged and is gone. And so when we're thinking of it from a scaling perspective, maybe we're at spending 5 to 10% of budget into brand right now, but the hope is this year and next year and the year after that, we start really maximizing a lot of our spend into upper funnel efforts just to start building that awareness and recall over time. And that will obviously eventually funnel back down to CPAs being more efficient within the direct response program for us, because there'll be a lot of retargeting initiatives going on, which we have almost none of now because we don't actually need them. That's not kind of we've been building over time.
Yeah. Just for the benefit of our audience, CPA is cost per acquisition.
Oh no, I might have lost you. Did you just say something?
Yeah, just I think we're back. For the benefit of our audience, when you talk CPA, you're talking cost per acquisition.
Yeah, cost per acquisition. And for us, we kind of look at it two ways, because we focus so substantially on spring acquisition. For viewers who don't know, that's our monthly giving program. Because we focus so specifically on spring acquisition, we tend to look at things from a spring CPA perspective, so a cost per spring subscriber. But of course, we're running spring focused ads that do still generate one-time donors. So we also look at it from a blended cost per donor as well. And an overall, I would say the main metric that we look at to say, is this campaign driving performance for us, is a blended return on investment. So taking the immediate donation value from our one-time donors and the immediate and assumed subsequent monthly donation value from our subscribers and comparing that to the media spend of the campaign.
Got it. So when you're thinking about a new spring member, somebody who's going to make a monthly donation, do you calculate lifetime value kind of bluntly based on average, people stick around for 3 years or 5 years, and we're going to use a conservative estimate, or how do you model that out?
Yeah. So right now it's a holistic conservative investment. So we're saying, let's say from this Meta campaign, we made $15,000 of subscription revenue. We're going to say, and let's say, 18 months is the average. We would say 15,000 times 18 is the assumption. But we are working really hard with our data team right now to be more sophisticated on that, because we know that there are such differences in value between, let's say, somebody who becomes a subscriber through a Google ad searching for charity water versus somebody seeing an Instagram story for the very first time and entering in through that route. And so we're starting to try to be more sophisticated and looking at the retention by platform at the very least, so that we can weigh them a little bit more in relation to how we should be allocating out that budget to get the best ROI.
Right. Now, you spend very little on actual brand building ads, but Charity Water has a fairly big brand, I would say. And you're out there building brand. Scott's out there all the time, right?
All the time.
All the time. Like
public relations works real hard here at Charity Water. So.
Right. Yeah. You also get a fair amount of earned media. So you get coverage in the news. Scott's written a book that was a big brand sort of push. It's in all the airports, right? Wherever you travel, like there's like in an airport bookstore, there's Thirst. And then you do a lot of organic social media and sort of organic brand building. Oftentimes very like beautiful visuals, like a visually immersive experience that you often create. I know this is a super fuzzy and like qualitative sort of question. How much of that do you think allows you to just like run straight up direct response because the brand is so strong?
I mean, I think all of it factors in. I think it's hard to understand which components are the biggest factors.
Mm,
You've got kind of Scott out at events, conferences, doing podcasts. We've got public relations kind of working on, like you said, media for us. We have organic social doing a lot of work for us as well. And I think we also have a really wide, far-reaching community of givers that are just so excited to be a part of the Charity Water family, and excited to recommend and refer people into our monthly giving program as well. So it's hard to say, but I mean, I think all of those things impact the fact that we're able to do these direct response programs. But I think to the same extent, it's this conversation of what's got in us here is not going to get us there.
right.
We need more than that. I think we all know we need more than that, but we haven't got to the point where we're really actively saying, let's make brand even stronger than it is right now.
Mhm. How do you think about attribution? Now, a lot of our audience is small, medium-sized shops. Attribution is hard, and because it can be fairly technical and complex. There's just a lot of errors of attribution, and people just kind of accept that. Um, how are you thinking about attribution? Because you've got all these different things happening. The direct response ad is often maybe the last mile, like it's capturing that demand, but the demand was created down the line somewhere. Do you have attribution models, or how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, it's a great question because it's a question that we're kind of diving into with the data team this year. So we currently sort of the organization source of truth is Looker. That's the tool we really use to report. And of course, internally on my team, we look at platform metrics, which are 7-day click, 1-day view for the most part across most of the platforms. And so we kind of compare because Looker is a little bit more, we focus on attribution from a last click perspective on Looker, which we know is going to take away some of the magic that might be happening on the platform. I would just say this. I think it's really difficult. I think even at an organization of our size, and I've been at organizations much bigger than this, attribution is a very, very difficult conversation to have. And it's challenging to really understand which platforms you should be attributing performance to or not, especially if you're running across multiple platforms and they're all saying different things. And then on Looker, we're using last click. So we really don't, Emily could have went and seen a meta ad and then seen a Google search ad when she typed it in 7 days later, and that's going to attribute to Google. And we really have no way to understand that.
Mhm.
At previous organizations, we've had kind of big enough resourcing to use incrementality testing and vendors that allow us to do incrementality testing. At my last company, we leveraged Measured, and they were wonderful. But really at our size, there's not too much sophistication, I would say, in attribution method.
Yeah.
I think for the most part, what we would want to look at, and something we're working on our data team with, is being able to look at a 7-day click through, at least, like actually tracking something back to a UTM parameter as long as it happens within a 7-day window.
Right.
But there is a lot more work we certainly need to do there.
Right, but the thing is, you've given all of us a sigh of relief because we're all going like, oh, okay, Charity
Like,
Water is
oh, okay.
also struggling with attribution.
Thank God. I mean, if it makes you feel better, some of the brands I've worked with in the past in the for-profit world are much bigger, and they also,
Yeah,
you would look at some of these companies and you'd be like, how do they not know? How do
right.
they not know? And it's just, we're in a very tumultuous period within the digital and online landscape in general. And I think there's a lot of questions that there's really no specific answers to. And because things are changing and evolving so quickly, it's hard to really understand, where do we go from here? What do we trust?
Yeah.
I always try to trust my intuition, which generally is on an attribution method of a 7-day click, 1-day view. At least gives us a conservative understanding of, is something occurring when somebody is clicking on these ads.
Yeah, I mean, there's that old advertising quote, which is like 50% of my advertising is working. I just don't know which 50%.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and it gets, I mean, it can get a little political internally. So, over 15 years ago, we closed $1 million gift. And the way it was closed was my team had done a lot of demand generation. We earned a lot of earned media. We were writing a weekly column at the time for the CEO. The major gifts team was doing prospecting, and so they got a meeting with a donor, and the donor said, "Oh man, I read your CEO's column every week. I don't miss it. It's one of my favorites. I've seen what you guys do in the news. You're just wonderful for this city. I'd like to be involved, but I'd like to think about it." So the major gift officer goes back for the second meeting. He brings his CEO along, and in that meeting, they close the gift. So the CEO is like, "I closed $1 million gift." The major gift person is like, "I closed $1 million gift. I prospected." And we're like, "But before you got to the lady, she was reading all the stuff that we were putting out." And so, like, who gets attribution? And it shouldn't matter, but when it matters is budget allocations.
Yeah. Well, I think that's when a nice attribution method comes about. Like, maybe you want to. I can't even remember the terms of it, which is probably so bad. I need to go back to a marketing course. But I remember at other companies we used to give a much stronger percentage to first and last.
Yeah.
And I know, some people would argue that everything should be equal across the board. I think the funny thing is just being able to tell that there were so many touches is actually the hardest part of it.
Right.
But yeah, I think if we had that know-how and that clarity of like the touch points that this person was going through, if we get to the point of that sophistication within our data, we would probably look at something more focused on higher percentages for first and last, which means you would be doing really great in that
Yeah.
instance.
We got the first touch attribution. Yeah. So we get more of the budget.
They're not going
Um,
to do it if you don't get them in first. That's the most, to me, that's always the most important thing. You're not going to get to the last if you haven't brought them in. So
right.
to me, if you're bringing those people in, that's the most important. And hopefully, you have the methodology to sell at the end of the day, whatever your product is.
Yeah. All right. So that's your digital strategy. Broad strokes, you look at the lifetime value of a donor. If somebody comes a monthly donor, how much can we expect that person to give over their lifetime, whether they stay with us for 18 months or 24 months or 5 years or 10 years. And then you look at that cost and you say, okay, well, if this donor over their lifetime might give us $1,000, what would we be okay to spend to acquire that donor? And I'm not sure if you're able to share or allowed to share, but what is sort of a ratio that you are comfortable with?
Yeah, I mean, I can't share specifics, but I will say what we aim for from an ROI perspective is 2 to 1.
Yeah.
I would say what we've been seeing for the last year, and we'll probably speak about it later, but we've been kind of experiencing these ongoing lags in the amount of acquisition volume we'd intended. And so I think we've shifted a little bit back, like maybe a step back to 1.5 to 1, because if you're seeing lags cross-platform, cross-organization, that's sort of like, okay, we need to reassess. Are we willing to spend a little bit more than we thought we would? And so for us, I would say that 2 to 1 is always going to be our goal. But depending on seasonality, depending on the landscape of the world and how people are willing to give during certain times, that might change. And I think that that's really important for all organizations to understand, which is there are impacts that we just don't know are going to happen until they happen. And it's just about being able to kind of refine and reassess that goal, knowing that you're getting impacted everywhere. It's not just one spot.
All right. Let's talk about some of the stuff that you've been testing recently in order to mix up your media sort of spend a little bit. So you've been testing direct mail, you've been testing direct response TV ads. Let's start with direct mail.
Yeah.
What made Charity Water go after all these years? Let's give direct mail a shot.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, the biggest kind of one of the biggest bets I think we made going into 2022, which I keep thinking it's 2022 right now. It's not anymore. So last year was we've always functioned as majority a digital based nonprofit org. So we were always kind of doing things probably a little bit backwards from some of the traditional nonprofit organizations. And we knew, direct mail can perform phenomenally. It's performed phenomenally for some other nonprofit orgs. It's performed phenomenally for some of the for-profit brands. And so we really wanted to understand, would this be a more personalized experience for a prospective donor? Would they respond differently here than they do on digitally? And it was just really important for us to understand the differences between how the kind of format of the ad would work for the audience we were looking at. And so that's kind of why we took that first foray into it. And it's really similar with direct response TV, right? It's
Right.
this reasoning of we have to try different things that we know can scale for us if we want to grow exponentially year over year. And so why not? If we've seen it's performing for other organizations and we've heard from other CEOs, like this is something you should at least try and see if it's promising for you. And so we really went into all of our pilots with that thinking for 2022.
How did it work?
So direct mail. So I think when you pilot anything, when we pilot a new initiative, especially if it's a different format of ad, we want to pilot it a couple of times, not just a singular time. The unfortunate component of direct mail is we only did a singular pilot for it. So just one campaign. And we decided to shut it off rather quickly just because challenges in relation to what we could provide for direct mail. So obviously for most nonprofits that do direct mail, they kind of have an infrastructure built out in terms of how to support the donations coming in. So people can go ahead and donate or sign up to a monthly giving program via mail, via call center, digitally. When we started direct mail, we thought we could get there and we just did not have the resources and tool set to actually set that infrastructure up. So at the end of the day, these people could only donate via mail if they were going to donate with a one-time gift. And for anything else, they had to go on the website and actually donate. We didn't have a call center set up or anything in relation to that. So kind of as we went along this pilot journey, we realized we couldn't support these things
Got
and we
it.
knew that they had an impact on performance. So we didn't see the great performance. I would say we walked out of it having some learnings, but we ended up just not seeing the ROI we wanted to see because there was such, a high cost to the mailers at the end of the day.
Right. Was this a cold acquisition, or was it reacquiring lapsed donors, or what? Or was this like a warm donor sort of play?
So that also goes into the biggest challenge, which was when we set it up, it was focused on one-time donors. So people who'd been one-time donors within, I believe it was a 2-year period. And we were attempting to get them to shift over to the monthly subscription, our monthly giving program
Right.
this spring. And obviously we couldn't support them doing that via mail. Or via call center, which was the original hope. And so we had to shift sort of the strategy of how we were going to reach out to them. And so what we actually ended up asking was for a repeat one-time gift, which obviously lowers our assumed ROI. So you kind of see like all of
Yeah.
these kind of toppling issues in relation to how the pilot went and why we said like, okay, we actually need the structure. The structure is really important. We can't pilot it
Yeah.
without the structure. And so yeah, if we just look at ROI holistically, it performed well, but we went that extra step, of course, into incrementality testing. So when we look at what was actually incremental performance, the ROI was then negative, which really
Right.
told us, without this mailer, they still probably would have given what they would have given had we emailed them.
Got it.
And that's kind of where we ended up. But we were able to test Basically, we were able to segment our one-time donor audience into two different overarching personality types. So we had, an agreeable personality type, which that group really value relationships, they're nurturing, they're caring, compassionate. And then we had another segment, which was an openness audience, and they were very curious and interested in narratives and very, wanting to be educated and wanting to really learn. And so we were able to derive some insights off of those audiences specifically and how to message to them potentially in other forms of digital marketing,
Right.
like email, SMS, etc. What we found is that our openness audience, which was the more curious of the two, had much more high incrementality marks than that of the agreeable audience, regardless of the kind of mailing format that we gave to them.
Right.
And then we also tested two different mailing formats. So we tested a long form letter, and we tested a very short form postcard, like 2 sentences, very quick ask. And what we found is that agreeable audience, or general compassionate nurturers, responded really well to that postcard. That was the high level incrementality for them, whereas that curious openness audience responded more positively to the long form letter. So I think, if nothing else came out of it, knowing these two segments and knowing how to nurture them moving forward and how to potentially modify messaging to them. And that potentially we need to modify our mailing formats to kind of fit those personalities over time.
Got it. When you say long form letter, are you talking 4 pages, 6 pages?
Oh, well, it was just like a full letter. I just mean it's longer form than a postcard.
Gotcha. Okay. Got it. Did you support the mailer with any phone calls, any emails, any ads?
No. So basically, so that we could run the incrementality test really simply, it was anybody who got the mailer was taken off of any digital ads, anything in relation to that. They were still provided the normal emails. And so that was really the difference, right? The exposed group got a direct mailer and the regular emails, and the holdout group just got the emails. So it was really just us understanding the incrementality of the add-on there.
Right. Now, the direct mail letter you sent, did that send donors to a specific landing page that sort of you were able to track it that way, even if they couldn't call, they could go to a specific landing page? Okay.
Yeah, so we did. We also had we had tested QR codes as well. So aside from like the 2 audiences and then the 2 mailing formats, there was also a test kind of running parallel where some people would receive letters with QR codes, some people would receive postcards with QR codes. So outside of just the vanity URL that was on everything, we would have QR codes to understand would people actually use them. And we did see some usage. I would say was probably more usage than the norm. And I think that's pretty standard for us. And we talk about that a little bit more in DRTV. We find that QR codes, people just love QR codes. And so generally, we kind of focus on ensuring we have vanity URLs and QR codes on everything at this point, because we do skew a little bit younger sometimes in audience.
Yeah. Okay. There's a lot we could get into, and I'm conscious of the time here, but direct mail is really like a consistency over time play. Do you see Charity Water going back into it and saying, hey, this is really like a 12-month thing that we got to run and sort of give it a more thorough try, or do you think you've learned enough from the test to be like, this is not on the docket for right now, it's probably not the way that we think we're going to grow?
I think the difficulty is the resourcing and structure we need to get that 12-month pilot. I do not think it's something we're going to say no to in the future, but I think we need to have that structure stand up in the best way to ensure that 12-month pilot is going to perform. From my perspective, the biggest issue we had was not having a call center, especially if we decide to widen to prospecting audiences. I mean, thankfully for that, we had one-time donors that are used to digital at the very least. That's how they know us. That's where they found us for the most part. But when we're thinking about, hey, we want a 12-month pilot and we want to prospect, and that's going to be one of the most important things we do with direct mail and with broadening our brand in general, we really need to meet people where they're at and make sure with that we can accept forms of donations from call center and from mail, and especially be able to get people in our monthly giving community that way, which I think is one of the biggest challenges. So
Yeah.
yes, it's still top of my mind and we're hoping to be able to do it. Will it happen this year? I don't think so, but hopefully, in another year or 2 years, we'll get to the place where we can really set that up the right way.
Yeah, and the storytelling craft that Charity Water has sort of like honed and perfected over time in-house. I just want to encourage you, like that would translate very well to very tactical experiences with somebody holding something in their hand that doesn't necessarily have to look like a regular old direct mail letter that other nonprofits may send out. Yeah.
I agree. And we did do pretty standard creative. And I think that was also an issue we had as well of like, oh, like we want to draw outside of the lines, which is always kind of the brand perspective of Charity Water. Like,
Yeah.
let us color outside of the lines. And really have the manpower to do it. And I want us to be able to do that. And like you said, if we do a 12-month pilot, it's not about let's hit these people one time with a direct mailer. It's how do we tell a story over time, and do it a way that feels authentic to our brand.
Right.
And so I'm really excited to be able to one day do that when we're ready and set up to support it.
All right. Well, let's get into direct response TV. You've tried TV ads, I think, for the first time during the holiday season in 2022. Is that right?
Yeah, direct response. So we had done connected TV previously, and we had seen pretty decent, I would say promising results from piloting CTV. We decided to go into DRTV specifically because, again, we're headed for growth. We need to find channels that we can not only kind of significantly scale our investment year over year, but also broadens our reach, right? So direct response TV kind of does both at the same time, which was really exciting for us. And so we decided to pilot it for a 4-month period. So we've been running since October. It ends at the end of this month. And yeah, it's just been really exciting to test, to be honest, because it's something we've never done before. So basically, in terms of how we set it up, like our main focuses for the test was, the first being how our message performs across different categories of network. So for instance, news, foods, entertainment, movies, etc. And then kind of secondarily understanding how performance might vary if we have different messaging within commercials. So we decided to go on air with 3 different TV spots. They all were 2 minutes in length. So the first one really focused on an individual's story. Her name's Giselle, and really her experience with the water crisis and how it impacts her community. One was focused more on family, and so it really paralleled this idea of families are living without access to clean water, and this could be your family if you were just born, in another location in a community like this. And then the third one was very different. We referred to it as a journey of a donation video. So it's really talking about if you give $20 to Charity Water per month, how does your donation impact what we do every day, from the partners we work with to the people who get access to clean water to the community leaders who then take over some of these sanitation programs. How does this money that you're going to give us make this kind of far-reaching impact over time? And so we kind of had those kind of testing protocols set up going into it. And what we've seen so far is, we're still very much in the early stages. So the campaign's not over yet. But it's been really promising. We had assumed like a monthly net media cost per monthly donor of, I don't know, like in the negative thousands, honestly, knowing that this is kind of a broader campaign, and we kind of landed immediately overperforming within the first month. And obviously we've made optimizations since, and we're continuing to see that cost be even more promising to us over time as we're making those optimizations. And funny enough, all of the creatives are performing really well. So So we don't have one or the other that's really swaying. I would say the individual story of Giselle is probably the most prominent, specifically within when we look holistically at all of the
Right.
networks, but all of them are performing very well. Somewhat different than the norm. We found a significant portion of people who end up being acquired donors from DRTV are going directly into monthly donation program. Something to note is, yes, the TV spots kind of mention the monthly giving community, and the landing page is a little bit more focused on monthly giving as well. But that is a little bit far from the norm of what our agency has seen with other nonprofit orgs. So we're kind of already seeing that monthly giving is really the focal point when the audience gets to the website after they see those ads. And then again, QR codes are just killing it for us. So we have a vanity URL up throughout the entire TV spot for the most part, but we also have QR codes. And oddly enough, those QR codes are being used a lot compared to some of the other campaigns that the agency has run. So we're really excited to kind of do that long-term analysis at the end of this month, and then hopefully be able to restart DRTV with more tests towards the back half of this year.
This is a little bit nerdery in DRTV, but there's this like standard format that has been developed for DRTV over like the last, 30 years, which is very much like you introduce a problem, the problem gets worse. It's a little bit on the, a little bit of sad music playing in the background kind of a thing. And over time, I'm not saying this as a negative, like over time, people have gotten really good at still preserving the dignity of the people being served. But it's very clear that the challenge they face is kind of insurmountable without a bit of extra help. And then it goes into, enter donor and how you can be part of this. It paints a bit of a picture of a desired future. And then throughout the entire ad, it's amazing how many times they repeat the call to action. It's like every 7 seconds, it's the call to action, right? Did walk me through your approach versus that traditional approach, and maybe you're using the traditional sort of approach. Yeah.
So to an extent, with us, obviously, it's really important that we always focus on hope as a brand. And we don't really, I think the idea of masking it kind of with this idea of like guilt and shame to the donor is something that we stray as far away from as we possibly can. So there was actually a lot of push and pull when we built the creative to kind of go with those best practices, right? Like, let's say the call to action like 40 times within this 2-minute window. Let's really kind of be repetitive about certain lines. Where we actually ended up is that the two kind of spots that I mentioned, the individual story and the family story, are very focused on those best practices. They're a little bit toned down, though, I will say, because we wanted to make sure like, that's just maybe a little bit too much for us. But Journey of a Donation was created internally by our team with no best practice. So we were basically like, we understand that there are best practices. This is our very first pilot. So we want to align with what you think is going to work, but we also want to do what we think is going to work. And we want to put it all out there and see if there's going to be significant differences between the two. And the funny thing is we haven't seen significant differences, right? In some cases, Journey of a Donation actually outperforms the others. And that's something that I think is just the charity water mentality of we want to innovate, we want to be different, we want to stay as close to our brand as possible. And this was a way for us to really say, hey, if we kind of chuck some of those best practices out the window, is that going to hurt us? And what we've found thus far is it's not hurting us at all. So that's really exciting, which means kind of our next foray into kind of our secondary pilot with DRTV. I think we're going to go a little bit deeper into that and really trust the brand team to say, we're going to throw out some of those best practices because we didn't need them to begin with. And now we know that to an extent.
Last question before we open it up to some Q&A here. It looks like 2023 is going to be a year of a lot of budget cutbacks, not necessarily for nonprofits, like across the board, right? We've got massive tech layoffs. we've got a lot of people pulling back advertising and marketing budgets, fundraising budgets, all of that. Some of that might just be doom and gloom. Who knows? Internally, what are the big bets you're making for 2023, and how are you seeing this play out?
Yeah, well, I think to kind of go back to what you mentioned about like the impact we're seeing, I think obviously my perspective is going to be purely anecdotal, but we, year over year, last year had invested paid spend. We had the launch of several really engaging, beautiful campaigns. We did everything we were supposed to do to grow year over year. And what I would say is, even though we did those things, we've observed, a lag in direct organic conversions, donations. I'm so used to media speak, conversion, everything. We saw a higher likelihood for our donors to go into one time rather than monthly, even though our focus has always been on that monthly message. And we've seen average gift slightly lower as well. So I think with kind of that speculation of an economic recession, that's kind of the cause of what's driving some of that lag. But again, it's all speculation. It's purely anecdotal. Who knows? But that's kind of where we and our finance team feel, what's happening. That's kind of the undercurrent of what's happening for us. So there's a couple big bets, a couple small bets we're making for this year. The big bets kind of being that mass awareness and recognition. And so I think a lot of that is tied up in TV. It's tied up in us really focusing on SEO and content building, which hasn't been something we've really focused on from a website perspective. And then really navigating a more personal ask experience. So we didn't get into live events, which is another thing we piloted in 2022 to really great promise. It was actually the best pilot we had in 2022, is having more live event focused media spend, whether that's us sponsoring tours, sponsoring conferences, or even putting together live events for current donors. Like, that is something we want to do. And we have found that does lead us to really successful acquisition as well. So those are some of the bigger bets. And smaller, I think, is really just nurturing and providing more communication and transparency with prospective and current donors. So, providing authentic, genuine organizational updates, making sure people are aware of the impact that they're making on the communities that they're helping. And I think we're also specifically with that, maybe taking your foot off the gas pedal a little bit on media investment. We've also been so routed as an organization, referrals and peer-to-peer fundraising. And so I think that might also have a little bit of a resurgence this year and maybe in the years to come. The first time I ever was introduced to Charity Water, I actually gave up my birthday for Charity Water. Fun fact. So I think as budgets get tighter, that's definitely something we'll probably lean on as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Look, when you've got financial sort of slowdowns or recessions, whatever you want to call it, or crises like the pandemic we just came out of, people draw a little bit closer to what they know and who they know. It's just like a natural human reaction. And so betting on peer-to-peer makes a lot of sense, because as trust is declining in society, especially because the last 3 years, the internet has been like a drunken barroom fight. Like, it's just like everything feels so contentious. So as trust is seems to be declining a little bit, whether that's true or not, I don't know. But trusting family and friends is for sure, like the peer-to-peer play just makes a lot of sense in a lower trust environment, right?
Yeah.
Let's get into some Q&As. Becky's been taking note of questions that people have asked as we went along here. So Becky, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, for sure. First of all, thanks, Megan. You just brought forward so many insights that I think were really helpful for me, and I'm sure for everyone else listening. A couple questions came in sort of throughout your talk. So I'm just going to go order by order. First of all, we were wondering, Celeste was wondering just if you could confirm. She said, I believe you just said you use 18 months as the average for calculating cost per acquisition for monthly donors. Is that what you actually said? Do you remember?
Yeah, for us, And something to note is that's kind of holistic to paid specifically. The month-end retentions that we use for, organic direct or other areas tend to differ, but I would actually say 18 months is pretty conservative for us, but I like the conservative method when we're looking at spending out on media campaigns. So that's generally what we'll use. And like I said, we're getting more sophisticated with that over time. If you're taking kind of a holistic approach to it, you actually might be doing yourself a disservice how you're allocating your media spend. And we're aware internally that we're doing that. And so that's something we're already thinking about changing for this year.
So when you're calculating how much am I willing to spend to get a new monthly donor, I look at that monthly donor. What is the first 18 months going to look like in terms of the donations they're going to make on a monthly basis? And then that's going to be the basis that we look at. Okay, it's going to be, let's say, $1,000. I'm comfortable spending 200 or 300 or 400 or 500 to get to 1,000 in the long term.
Exactly. And for us, it's at 2 to 1. So we're if that person's going to make us $2,000, maybe we'd be willing to spend 1,000. I would say we're not at that point. That's not usually what we're seeing, those numbers. But generally that's what we look at. We do sometimes get very lucky and get water project sponsors through ads. And that's great. Sometimes you're just like, oh, a 6,000, a 10,000, a 12,000 donation came through and we only spent $100 on it. But that's besides the point. But sometimes you get lucky.
I mean, in Canada, larger child sponsorship organizations are willing to spend $600 to $1,000 to acquire a child sponsor.
I will say this, our costs are not that high. I wish that I was willing to spend $1,000. It would make my job a lot easier.
Perfect. Thanks for answering that. And Celeste, if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A or the chat. Mike, just quickly, before some people may have to jump off at the top of the hour, people are just wondering if we're able to share this recording. And I think it's going to be uploaded as a live podcast that people can rewatch later on. Is that right?
Yeah, you can subscribe to the Build Good Fundraising podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, but this is also going to go up on YouTube.
Perfect. Thank you. Now, the next question for you, Megan, is from Anna. And this was during the part where you were talking about your direct mail experiments, the longer form letter versus the postcard. And Anna, let me know if I am misinterpreting your question. She is asking, what data did you use to determine the personalities? And I think by personalities, that's the segments who got the postcard versus the letter. Anna, tell me if I'm wrong, but that's it.
Hopefully you're right. If not, feel free to stop. But we worked, the vendor we used was Donor Voice for that direct mail program, who are absolutely wonderful. And so they were the ones who actually worked with us to segment those donors. I believe they leveraged Epsilon, if I'm not mistaken. This is a while ago. This is back one. But I believe it was Epsilon, and I think they really have their own kind of thinking about how they segment out people and what categories they go into.
Yeah, just a little bit more color on that. That's Ocean. That's the big 5 personality types. If
Mike's got it.
If you just want to Google the big 5, OCEA, like Ocean, you'll see what each of the personalities stand for.
Perfect. Awesome. I've got one more question here. If anyone else has any last minute questions, this is your last call. This question is from Adam, and Adam is just wondering how email is working for you for acquisition versus direct asks on social or digital ads in general.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so difficult because we look at email so differently from what we do in the acquisition world. But email has actually been really performant for us throughout 2022, and I'm sure it's going to continue into 2023. We actually saw email as one of our most successful year over year performance, compared to basically it was the only thing that was year over year very overperformant than we had expected it to be from a goal perspective. And so email for us, I would say, is really important. And I think we do a lot of due diligence and nurturing and kind of over communicating to our donors think like end of year giving alone, we sent out like 22 emails throughout the month. And so it's, on a different team than I am, of course, but really important in kind of increasing that communication and transparency with current donors. And then obviously anybody we kind of bring through the lead flow in advertising also goes into their very own email flow as well to nurture them into one-time donation.
Well, Megan, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, spending a bit of time with us today. I don't want to put you on the spot here, but would you come back sometime? Can we just make this like an annual state of digital fundraising with Charity Water, and we'll just get into everything you've tested and learned?
I'm down. Look, I'll catch you up next January. We'll have about like 10 more pilots. I only went through 2 out of like maybe the 12 pilots we've run today. But I will just say this. We've got a lot coming, and we've got a lot of new pilots going in the back half of this year that I'm really excited about. So whenever you want to chat, I'm around.
Sounds good. Where can people find you or Charity Water if they want to learn a little bit more and follow your journey?
Yeah, so you can find Charity Water on Instagram at Charity Water, which is beautiful and amazing, and you'll love the feed, especially if you're a true born creative. You can also find us at charitywater.org, and you can find me on Instagram at Megan Toscano. You'll see cute posts of me. There's really nothing that exciting there, I promise.
All right. Well, thanks, Megan. Really appreciate it.
Amazing. Thank you so much. It was great speaking with you both.
Okay. Bye.